we have Travis Bockenstedt, President and Chief Experience Officer at Pinnacle Advanced Primary Care here in Colorado, where he leads strategic growth and creates exceptional experiences for patients and clients, the majority of whom are employers. And Rushika Fernandopulle, who is the CEO of Liza Health, and has just been in the DPC industry for so long. So give it up for them. Let's give a standing ovation for Rushika and Travis.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. This is going to be a pretty exciting conversation. You kind of are going to get an old dog, new dog, ping pong today, and we're going to share basically how you guys can sort of grow in the large employer space. We're going to go through some quick intros so you know a little bit about us. We each have a case study that we're going to start with so you can learn a little bit about our large employer experience, how to win your first large client, because that's definitely a big thing, how to prepare for your first big client, and some things to consider in the execution phase. So I'm going to start with Rushika, and tell us a little bit about you and your tenure in the DPC space.
Great. No, so it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming. I'm a primary care doc, and I should remember the moment I decided I needed to do something different. It was 22 years ago. I was a primary care doc in an academic medical practice on the East Coast in Boston. And I still remember it was a dark February day. Those of you in the Northeast know it gets dark at like 3:30. I had 30 patients booked. They all decided to show up. I barely had time to go to the bathroom, let alone have lunch. And they just put this new crappy electronic health record in, and I couldn't sort of do the notes fast enough, so I would jot down things on a piece of paper. And then at night for 2 hours, while my family was having dinner without me again, I was trying to fill in these notes so I wouldn't get yelled at. And I had a colleague. It wasn't just me being bad at it, right? It was a system problem. I had a colleague who was doing the same thing, and she said something very profound. She said, Rushika, every day I lose a little piece of my soul. Every day I lose a little piece of my soul. These people come to us with such big needs. We have so much training. We should be able to help them. But the system isn't letting me do it. And then what she said next was particularly damning, and it seems to be getting worse and not better. And that's when I realized, we need to fix this. And I'd done what everyone else does. It's no secret the system is broken. It's doing these little tweaks and quality improvement projects and Six Sigma and serve on committees. And the realization hit me that February day 22 years ago that maybe the system is rotten to the core and we just need to start over and build something different. And change completely, that the system is based on transactions. And last I checked, what we need to be doing in primary care is actually healing people. And last I checked, transactions don't heal people, relationships do. So we have to build a whole model based on relationships. And at the time, this was crazy talk. And I ended up coming up like Garrison in Seattle, and a guy named Chuck Kylo in Portland, and a few other people around the country, that we all came up with the same idea, that we have to get out of this insurance billing game. We have to create practices from scratch that actually focus on relationships. We had to get paid differently. So we went to our patients and said, look, we're going to do all these things that your insurer is too stupid to pay for, like emailing you and spending enough time with you. So last I checked, I took an oath to serve you and not the insurer. So that's neither here nor there. So look, if everyone paid us about, at the time it was $40 a month, we're going to break even. If you're poor, pay us rich. If you're rich, pay us more. If you're a young person, which meant being 35 or younger, because I was 35, so I had to be on the right side of that line, pay us $25 a month, and we got on with it. So we started like most EPCs back in the early days, being purely retail, and people would just pay us out of pocket. We eventually realized that this was not just better outcomes and better experience, but we were lowering the cost of care. We were keeping people out of the hospital, out of the ER. And we ended up being one of the first folks to actually get an employer contract through a relationship with a broker, Arnie Milstein, from a company called Mercer Health and Benefits. We got a gig with the Boeing company. to work and serve Boeing patients. We built some practices for Boeing in Seattle, worked with the Casino Workers Union in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. We ended up then working with a slew of employers. We ended up eventually starting to serve Medicare Advantage plans and doing this with full risk in Medicare, and we can talk about that if people want to. We got CMS to create a new payment model for us called direct contracting, now called ACO REACH, where we could essentially, we were so confident that DPC would lower the total cost of care that let's actually get responsible for the total cost of care, right? Transformational. And maybe the case study I'll talk about, I could talk about a lot of them because we work with a ton of employers, was Dartmouth College. It was our first big employer contract when we started IORA. Dartmouth, it's about their university, obviously, one of the smaller Ivy League colleges. They're in Hanover, New Hampshire. They have about 3,000 employees. We serve their faculty and staff. About 6,000 belly buttons, as they would call it. And we built a practice for their employees. And we ended up charging, this is back before anyone knew what these rates were. I thought it was really simple, like, primary care is typically 5% of healthcare spend, and I think we should double that. Because 5% seems crazy, 10% sounds about right. So let's just make it $80 per person per month. You spent $40 per person per month last year in primary care. If you add up all the claims, double it to 80, and let's just get on with this. And let's, so our billing was literally a one-line email once a month to Dartmouth. We have this many patients. You agreed to pay us this much per $80. Do the math, send us a check. Our AR days, by the way, was -1 because they knew good and well how many patients were coming to us. And we just got the check. And really, we've served them now for 15 years. We've been doing that. And we can talk a lot more about, in the question of how that works. But again, it was a great and continues to be a great relationship.
That's really cool. I came into DPC as a patient, actually. So go back 7 years ago, I was the owner of my own company. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about employer groups, because I was one of those folks getting screwed by the system. And I had an anxiety attack 7 years ago, called the nurses line, and they were like, "What age are you? What symptoms are you having?" So I took an ambulance ride, spent 9 hours in the ER, and that cost $26,000. 7 years ago. The insurance company found a loophole, so I was on the hook for 26 grand. I was so angry that I marched myself into the cardiologist's office, demanded to speak to the doctor, and I said, "Why did you charge me this much money?" And he goes, "I don't know how much things cost." And I said, "What do you mean you don't know how much something costs?" I was just floored. So I was so upset with the system, I did a Google search 7 years ago, and I Googled doctors who don't accept insurance. Because I didn't want another physician hooked to this broken healthcare system. And back then, I came across this company called Peak Med, and the owner at the time was the fill-in physician for me, and I got a job right in the exam room and said, "Do you want to come join our company, be our marketing director?" Since then, 4 years ago, helped launch Pinnacle Advanced Primary Care from the ground up. When we started the company, we knew that we wanted to work with employers in the market. And that's a marketing decision we made day one. As you know, getting into the retail space, it's very easy to go there. It's hard to say as a practice that we want to be business first because that sales cycle is so much different. You're narrowing that pool to a few C-levels and HR decision makers. But we sort of kept our head down, worked really hard, and now we represent 250 small businesses from 1 employee up to our largest client with 1,200 lives in Colorado Springs, and about 70% of our members come from a local employer. So you guys can do the same thing. I truly believe it if you can stay consistent in that. That being said, I want to transfer over to you and to talk about what was that first big win like? And how did you even make it to the seat of the table to have that conversation? Because I think it's relationship building that helps you win large accounts.
Yeah, so we were a little countercultural. Like, I sort of didn't really like RFPs. They're nice because they're a forcing function, but we didn't want to be treated like a vendor, right? I think too often these RFPs turn into the lowest price, and that's not the point. We wanted, the mental model was we're going to be long-term partners with you. That your employees are our patients. We actually want the same thing, which is them to be healthy and stay out of trouble. So let's set that up. Our Dartmouth contract, by the way, was a 5-year contract. and was a direct relationship with Dartmouth. We didn't go through their health plan, which was Anthem Blue Cross. We didn't go through their broker, which was Siegel. This was a direct relationship. And we didn't even go through the head of HR. We went to the CEO. So as much as you can, going as high in the org chart with the CEO, the CFO, the head of strategy. Again, no offense, some of you might be HR people, but one doesn't go into HR because one is a risk taker and a innovator necessarily, right? But the CEO, this is for many companies, this is an existential threat. And so if you do it as a strategic thing, and so we had a 5-year relationship. We ended up moving, by the way, when we did our MA plan products, we were 10-year relationships, right? Because these are really important. By the way, you've got to be accountable too. Back to the last one, we said, look, at the end of 5 years, or 4 years, let's actually do an analysis of if we're saving you money. And we better be saving you money. If not, you should fire us. And so let's actually do that. And by the way, we actually, in a few of our things, we adjusted the price. We picked this random number because we didn't know what we were doing. And what we would say is we're going to be pretty transparent about our economics. And if we think we're getting paid too much, we're going to lower it. If we're getting paid too little, we want more. And so one of our first clients, casino workers in Las Vegas, we ended up with a really sick group of people, and we were getting too little, and we actually increased our rate. We worked with the Freelancers Union in New York with a lot of young, healthy people, and they were not coming to see us very often. We actually proactively lowered our rate. Remember, this is about building long-term relationships. It's not about who can screw each other in the short term, right? So how do you get these folks? It's relationship is pounding the pavement. It's a lot of great references. The first few are really important because they'll be references for the next ones. The brokers were really helpful. I told you about Arnie Milstein and Mercer. We got several through broker relationships. There's no magic to it. It's just sort of pounding the pavement.
I agree with you. I think it's really the long game that you're going to play in the large employer space. Just think if you own a company and you're in here, how many times do you get solicited in a given day? Tons. I get solicited all the time. So how long have you had the Dartmouth client?
So 14 years now. Yeah.
14 years. So I'm going to contrast that with our first large client that we've had for 90 days. And so the old dog, new dog thing here, we've had different experiences. So for us, we're huge relationship builders in South Denver and Colorado Springs. We spend a lot of time within the chamber business community because that is where a lot of decision makers are, movers, shakers in the business community. And I know some folks in here who've taken that route, and it's been successful with that. The CFO of the school district, this was 1,200 lives that dumped into our practice on July 1. And we were all excited. Like, I cried in the car when I learned that we got the client because it was the worst 3 months of my life negotiating. You can ask my team, like, I was on edge, and I was just like, I just want them to be done or just tell us no. And literally driving back to Denver, we got the yes. We did this because we had a relationship with the CFO. A long-term relationship with her. And one thing that was said yesterday is that if there's a change in leadership at a company, you have an opportunity to kind of pounce and get in. And this was our opportunity. The CFO was new. The broker gave her double-digit increases and was basically fired the next day. And she went out to market and called us and said, I want you to bid. I didn't even have to reach out to her. And that was a very long-term relationship that we have. Have you found that winning your other clients, that it's sort of who you know and that relationship you have with them?
Yeah, and this switch, so Jim Kim was the president of Dartmouth. He just got into office, and he called us, by the way. We didn't call him. I had a relationship with him, and he realized also he was given some crazy increase by Anthem Blue Cross, and he said, this is unacceptable. And so it is. It's building these relationships. The problem, unfortunately, is you build these relationships and you don't know how long it's going to take. We've had some that have taken 4 or 5 years to play out, and that just is what it is, right? So.
And you'll find that. You'll put clients in your pipeline, and they'll hear you. Yeah. And just get out into the community and make yourself a subject matter expert in healthcare disruption. On my LinkedIn profile, I have healthcare disruptor. I am unapologetic for what I do, and I am out there to disrupt the healthcare system. One thing I think when we have large clients, we wrote this in our notes, is having a marriage with the broker, the client, and the vendors. And that's one thing that we take to heart at Pinnacle. What are your thoughts on building that marriage, and do you feel that's key when working with large clients?
So it's very key, but the other existential risk is these people leave. right? So you can build this sort of long-term relationships, and they get fired, they get laid off, they get promoted, they get whatever. So it's important, to have that relationship, but then very quickly afterwards, build lots of other relationships, so that if you don't have a single point of failure. And so that's happened many times. Again, when you've had clients for 10, 15 years, they will change. And so you better get deep into it. By the way, it's really important is get as many of the decision makers or potential decision makers be patients in the practice. Then they'll never leave, right? So we have the SVP, who's really the day-to-day decision maker. He's been a patient, he's lost 50 pounds. He calls himself a fanboy. And he's never going to fire us, right? Because he has personally experienced it. And when there was a new president came in, we made sure that we went to her and said, we want you to come to the practice. Please come meet us. We'll take care of your whole family, right? So again, proactively building as many of these relationships as you can.
Word of mouth is the most powerful thing in DPC. We did the same thing with the school district. We got the CFO, the superintendent, the HR director, assistant principals to come into the practice. And by the way, we did not tell our clinical team that VIPs were coming in.
Yeah.
Because you don't want your clinical team getting this idea that they have to treat certain patients differently. So that was a big thing that we did that worked extremely well. The other thing I think when you bring on a large employer is you have, in my opinion, a short runway to get utilization to a point where you're showing cost containment and people are actually using the program for the renewal. What's your secret to kind of like getting people in the door and to get them utilized?
So signing a contract is what I call a hunting license. But hunting licenses don't put meat on the table, right? You got to go hunt. And so you've got to spend a lot of time once you sign that contract making sure that people are actually coming in. And the first couple hundred are really hard. Once they come, they will tell their friends, and then it becomes easy, right? But you've got to get over that activation hump, and that takes a lot of work. This is good old-fashioned retail. It's good. It's shooting fish in a barrel, right? But it's putting table tents up in the cafeteria. It's having health fairs. It's going to their new employee orientation. It's all of the above. By the way, depending solely on your clinical team to do it is a bad idea, right? So we actually built people like you. People who are really good at this, their job was to build these relationships in the employer and actually be the person. And then once they come in and people become a patient, now it becomes the clinical team's problem, right? And by the way, retention is another big issue. So you want to make sure that you keep people engaged. So we actually track, again, you need to have some CRMs and some systems. And if people have stopped becoming engaged, it behooves you to go and reach out and re-engage them and make sure you know why and what the problem is. You need to have a service recovery strategy. If for some reason people have a bad experience, then you fix it, et cetera. But again, hunting, it's just hunting licenses, doesn't put meat on the table, very explicit, get people in the door.
Our challenge was, to hire folks in healthcare, it's expensive. And how do you hire appropriately to onboard 1,200 patients, and how do you spread that out? Our director of clinical ops and director of membership are here, but Sherry, I thought she was going to kill me, right? It was like, yes, we have this account, but you're killing my team. So one thing we did, it was like a blessing and a curse. On May 1st, the school district let us put out a health history intake form. And it was a way to get early adopters into the practice. We expected like 100 people, 450 people pre-registered to come through the practice. So we've got this account to 35% utilization. Technically, it became effective on July 1, but we gave ourselves a 60-day runway. Because I think the harder thing is sometimes as you hit this peak, you've got all your early adopters and then you plateau for a moment. And I think that's probably sort of the next challenge.
And by the way, you can be creative. We would, when we were in the Medicare Advantage space, we had this sort of crazy thing where open enrollment comes in October, and so you get a ton of people at one particular time of the year, and you can't staff up for that. So you got to be creative. So we started doing group intake visits, right? Where we said, instead of doing one-on-one, we said, come in every Thursday, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m., and we would have a little happy hour. Right? And we would have some wine and cheese, and you could meet the doctor, and we'd talk about some health topic. And then if they have any particular burning questions, we'll pull you aside one-on-one, but then let's schedule you in to come for a real visit. But then we built that relationship right away. So again, you can be creative in how you build those relationships.
That is really cool. I hope you guys are getting a few pearls of knowledge here that you guys can use. One thing I want to touch on with the marriage thing real quick before we move to some key things on the execution side, and we'll get to some questions. we will not do a self-funded plan arrangement unless the broker lets us at the table. That is really, really important. If you don't have that relationship with the broker where they value you as a true subject matter expert within the plan, then you're just going to kind of bump heads along the way, right? We work with Brian Perry on one of our accounts, and he's given us a seat at the table. And the success we've had has just been really great because we have that relationship. We're able to pull back data, make decisions for the school district. So that's gone extremely well on that end. Let's talk about some key things in the execution phase when you get that client, maybe your top 2 or 3 on the execution side that you think DPC should nail when they're working with a large employer.
Yeah, so maybe 3 things. So one is, we would set up what we call joint operating committees, where we would meet sometimes with the broker, but always with the employer, and we would do that once a quarter. And I think keeping that open line of communication is really important. We would tell some stories in the beginning. Right, so the problem is, in the beginning you don't have a lot of data, right? The number 2 is you have to track data. You have to be accountable, and this is very controversial in the DPC space. There's sort of the black helicopter DPCs. Well, I'm not going to tell anyone what I do. They should just trust me. I'm a doctor. That's hokum, working with employers, right? Now, we need to not go crazy like the current industry is, but you've got to be accountable, and you've got to have systems to easily track the right stuff. But you start with stories, right? Because you'll get stories right away. People come in and you've changed their trajectory, and then you start reporting experience data, and then you start reporting outcomes data, and eventually you'll have enough data to look at utilization. But each one of those gives you more rope. We would do an intake survey. We'd ask people questions like, tell us about your experience with your usual primary care. How long did you wait? How often did they communicate with you? And then we could 3 months later say, now tell us about your experience with us. And we can do a nice little pre-post. So that was a nice way to very quickly sort of show, look, we're adding value. Your people think this is very different. So, show some joint operating committees. Number 2 is, reporting things. Third is, and again, this is a little controversial, is you can't doing just primary care isn't good enough. Opening 9 to 5 and turning your phone off, like what employers want to buy is access. Right? So you've got to figure out how to provide after hours access to people, and whether your docs take call in a rotating way, you contract with someone to help you, but you have got to, I think, to be a credible employer solution, actually have 24/7 access. Then we started adding things. We were sort of at the far end of the spectrum, but health coaching, starting to integrate behavioral health into the practice. When we work with the Carpenters Union, there was lots of musculoskeletal stuff, so we started having a physical therapist on board. Right? Unfortunately, one does need to customize to the needs of the employer, and then you can raise your rates because of that, right? Which is perfectly fine. But I think it's this open dialogue of what are the needs of the population, and then how do we serve it? And just, I'm a doctor and I'm just going to see people from 9 to 5 isn't good enough.
That was a great top 3. The only thing that I would add to the execution phase is have regular meetings with your clinical team and have some kickoffs, because you're going to think you're super prepared and ready to go. And then you're going to get your first 50 in, and your MA staff is going to be like, what did you do to me? There are so many things. Now I've got to kind of work with the insurance company. So I would say, making sure that you just help your team through that process. Rushika, is there anything else you want to mention before we get to some Q&A? Just burning questions out there. So if anyone has any questions for us, we would love to take them. Got one in the back.
So, hi, Rushika.
Hi.
Sometimes the distribution is through brokers or benefits consultants who will bring you an employer. And in our experience, they really wanted to keep that relationship tight. Do you have any recommendations on how to interact with the employer directly, even if it's brought through by a broker, so that essentially you have a direct relationship with that employer that doesn't get taken away, say, if the broker ends up getting replaced or something like that?
Yeah, so we insisted on it. There are several things we insisted on, and one of them was a direct relationship with the employer. I was not interested in being cut out of that relationship. We just say no. And so we would just have a relationship, and I would call them up directly, and we would have these joint operating committees. And again, this stuff is within your control, and if a broker didn't like that, we weren't going to work with them.
I would say, too, I love my broker partners, so just plug your ears for a second, brokers of the room. But my job is to make our brand so sticky, so valued in the company that if a broker were to change on us, that the client keeps us no matter what. So that is the number one goal for us, is just to make our brand so likable that if things were to change on that end, that they do retain their DPC contract.
Yeah, we even had an employee at Dartmouth, actually. Their TPA, Anthem, Blue Cross, now Elevance, was getting kvetchy. They got mad at them working directly with us. Remember, we didn't run our stuff through them at all. We just got a direct relationship with Dartmouth. So Dartmouth said, great, you're fired. We can get someone who does want to work with this practice because this is so important to us. And they did, and they put it out to bid. And one of the things they bid is you have to work with our practice. You have to give them the claims data. You've got to do all these things. And they found someone, right? So again, the key is I think it's so important to have direct relationships with the employers.
DPC space. We originally operated on a non-conventional payer model in the brain injury space. Looking at creating value, since we don't have a ton of metrics and a ton of data on utilization or anything like that currently, what value do you see in offering DPC to some of those executives or high-level decision makers on the front end without transaction?
Yeah, you can go.
So we have not. So we do some comp to memberships. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Yeah. So I think it's interesting. Like if you feel like the client is truly interested in becoming a member and getting engaged, it could be an interesting strategy. If you're feeling that you're just like forcing them into a pilot program and they really don't get it, I necessarily don't know how useful that could be. Another tactic you could look at to kind of soften the blow into DPC, if they're buying the membership in bulk, is to start with a little bit of a lower rate year one and be transparent with them that it's going to go up year 2 and 3. So yes, I think it's a good idea-ish. I just think make sure the execs have the right intentions, and also, do they know what they're looking for when they get there, right? So what are the expectations when they come into the clinic? Are they understanding the model, first of all? What are your thoughts on, do comp memberships?
Yeah, no, and we would love, we did meet and greets all the time, right? So if you wanted to come and, we would have a meeting with people, whether our retail or our employer client, and said, you want to come and meet the doctor and even have a little conversation about your health? That's fine, and we wouldn't charge for the first one. And then, but after that, we did not do fee for service. We did not do one visit fees. In general, we said, look, we're about ongoing relationships, and so if you want to stay with this, you have to transition, but we'll do one for people to give it a try.
Little pro tip, if you have chambers in your community, we do comp chamber memberships. So the staff of the chamber don't pay to go to our practice, but their family members do. And we negotiated like sponsorships with it, and basically we got the business community to experience us. So we do chamber relationships, our business relationships, where we do comp a few memberships for something in return, if you will.
But there are lots of markets have these business coalitions on health too, yes, even beyond that, and those are great places to try and build relationships.
I think we have time for like one more question, if anyone has one out there. Oh, Alex.
This is kind of going back to the systems things that we talked about yesterday, and you touched on it today. You mentioned earlier, Rushika, about a CRM. I believe that as you start to go B2B and you grow, you need to have more of that structure in place. Can you talk about which actual products you use for the CRM side of things, or what you have used and what you might recommend?
Yeah, no, so I think you need a CRM. So we are an exception. We raised a bunch of venture capital. We built our own EHR, which was really a CRM, by the way, right? Because when you start doing DPC raise, you don't need an EHR. You need a CRM. You need to track, how everyone's doing and relationships and the like. But we did have a CRM for clients, right? So we have a whole thing about prospects and then, people who are, likely and then closed. And we started using Excel. Excel works pretty well at the small scale, and eventually moved into a Salesforce thing. There are now people on the market who sell. I bet you Hint sells something like this too, but no, maybe you should.
We're talking to them about building it in.
But I think it's important.
We use Monday.com as our CRM. We use their workplace part of it. Sherry uses it for clinical and has all of our clinical resources there searchable. We've got different departments. So I'd recommend Monday.com for you guys. It can help you with your clinical workflow, and it can help you with your sales also, and that is key. if you need to keep them hot in the sales lead funnel, otherwise you'll lose them, right? So I'd highly recommend Monday.com.
Great.
Are you going to hang
We're done.
out there
Yeah.
afterwards?
Yes.
We'll be out there afterwards. Thank you guys so
Thank
much
you all.
for joining us.